Okay, here is yet another small exercise case. This is now on a peculiar situation, namely a warehouse is involved, an acknowledged tax exempted warehouse. We mentioned that rule already. It's somewhere in paragraph 4, number 4a. The idea is that you can deliver goods into a warehouse where they are under supervision, cannot be sold to a consumer, and that as long as they are in that warehouse, they can be sold, resold, and resold free of tax until somebody takes them out from the warehouse. This is a peculiar rule which simplifies the frequent trading with the same good. And well, just let's have a look what might happen. We have here I am Porter from Personenhausen in Germany. That is a small city. I changed the name. Originally it was Mannheim, which means man's home. In times of gender terminology, that's no longer possible, so I called it in a neutral way Personenhausen, that's person's house. Well, Mr. Porter from Personenhausen now buys potatoes from Switzerland for a net price of 20,000, and these potatoes are delivered into an acknowledged tax-exempt warehouse and are there stored on his behalf. The Swiss supplier pays the importation VAT at the German border, and that happens in February. Mr. Porter then in March sells the potatoes for a price of 25,000 to the German trader Theo Trader from Tübingen. Theo lets the potatoes where they are, so still inside the warehouse. Theo in turn, on the beginning of April, sells these potatoes again for a price of 30,000 to a retailer. And the retailer, let's call him R from Ratingen, which is in Düsseldorf. The retailer at the beginning of May comes to the idea, I need my potatoes, shows up with a truck there, takes the potatoes and moves away from the warehouse and distributes them among the shops of his enterprise to sell them to the public. Well, how has these sequence of events to be treated? Let's have a look and begin at the beginning. Transaction number one. Who does what with whom? The Swiss seller sells to Mr. Porter, and it is about potatoes for a price of 20,000. Now we know nearly everything what we need to know. Taxability has to be tested first, so paragraph 1, number 1 is to be tested. The seller from Switzerland is evidently an entrepreneur. 2.1, sentence 1 and 3. Acts within the activities of his enterprise, so not in the private sphere. Yes, presumably that's even a main part of his activity, selling potatoes, but it might also be an ancillary one. In both cases, that would be covered by range of the enterprise or scope of the enterprise, so no problem here for taxability. For consideration, yes, naturally, the seller demands a price, so that's clear. Is it a delivery or service? Potatoes are tangible goods. They are sold, so 3.1 USDG is fulfilled. It is a delivery. The place of delivery, basic rule is 3.6 sentence 1, where the transport of the good begins. That would be Switzerland. However, whenever a good comes from the third countries into the inland of Germany, the special rule of 3.8 has to be tested. First, the good in question crosses the border from the third country into the inland during that transaction. That's fulfilled. And the supplier is the person who pays the importation VAT. That's fulfilled because the case data says so. So then the place of delivery is, in contrast to the basic rule, deemed to be in the inland. That means this transaction is taxable in Germany. Is there a tax exemption? And the answer is yes. You remember that warehouse rule for number 4a. There are certain warehouses which are supervised by the fiscal authorities, or rather by somebody who is accepted by them as a trustworthy warehouse keeper. And every good which has been stored inside the warehouse is completely free of tax. So delivering a good into such a warehouse is automatically also tax exempt, and that can be looked up there, and so it's tax exempt. The tax base for reasons of the tax declaration is 20,000 because 20,000 is the agreed price under civil law that is paid, and if that transaction is tax-free, evidently no VAT amount can be included in that price. Tax rate and all that stuff is no longer of interest. The only final remark is, what about the input tax claims? The Swiss supplier, yes, still has a claim for input tax for the importation VAT, which he has paid, see 15.1 number 2. That his output transaction is tax-free does not endanger this. That can be looked up in paragraph 15.3 number 1, and I even forgot to put that on the list here as a small note, so try to remember it on your own and look it up. Well, let's have a next idea. Transaction number 2. Mr. Porter now sells the potatoes again to a trader, and he has the nice name Theo Trader. So the potatoes are now sold for a higher price, 25,000, and Theo Trader has let them in the warehouse. I'm going to speculate a bit. And when hunger goes up, prices go up, so I sell my potatoes with a gain. To test this again, taxability. Now Mr. Porter is the entrepreneur. He acts within his enterprise activities. He acts for consideration. All that is clear. It's still a delivery because potatoes are still a taxable good. The place of delivery is now, well, to be determined according to the rule of paragraph 3.7. The goods are not moved during the transaction. Only ownership position is changed. So what counts is the place where the goods are at the moment when the position like an owner changes, and that is in the warehouse. So that's in Germany, so it's taxable, evidently. Tax exemption, well, we still have the case, the rule applying that everything which is sold inside and is stored inside a tax-free warehouse can be sold tax-free. So it's still tax-free under paragraph 4, number 4a USDG, the warehouse rule. The tax base is the price which has been paid minus the VAT amount included. Now, as the thing is tax-free, it's evident that no VAT amount is included. So 25,000 gross amount is identical to 25,000 net amount in our case. No tax rate, no other stuff, no input tax for Mr. Porter because he already bought these goods tax-free. So we can go on to the next thing. Theo Trader from Tübingen now sells to a retailer from, let's say, Germany. And now the price is 30,000. Why 30,000? Because, well, I wanted it to be 30,000, so just arbitrarily. Taxability is again given. Theo Trader is now the entrepreneur, acts within his enterprise activities because he's a trader and sells something. For consideration, yes, he demands a price. It's still a delivery because the potatoes can still be regarded as a tangible good. The place of delivery is again as the goods are meant to stay at the same place. A delivery without the movement, so 3.7 is the place rule, and that rule leads to the place is the warehouse. Although these two people perhaps meet in Munich for the sales contract, that makes no impact. Decisive aspect is where the goods are when ownership changes, and they are in the warehouse and they remain there. So place of delivery is in Germany, transaction is taxable, tax exemption is still applicable because the goods are sold in the warehouse and remain in the warehouse. The tax base is again 30,000 paid, which is the gross price minus the VAT amount included, and as the transaction is at the moment tax-free, it is absolutely clear that at the moment when these 30,000 are paid, these 30,000 are a net amount. No input tax problems can be seen, so finished with that thing. Now, transaction number 4. Theo Trader takes the potatoes out from the warehouse and distributes them to his shops. Now, that's not really a transaction because it's not a sale, it's no new transaction. The only effect which that taking the goods out of the warehouse has is taking them out from the warehouse automatically ends the tax exemption for the previous sale. That means from the moment on when Theo Trader takes out the potatoes from the warehouse, transaction number 3 turns into a taxable and liable transaction. So retroactively, it becomes, well, I used the word here wrongly, not taxable, but liable to tax. The tax base is still 30,000 because we will later see that the 30,000 still do not contain VAT, but VAT comes on top because it has to be paid by Theo. 7% is the tax rate for that. You can look that up in paragraph 12.2, number 1, which directs you to a list in supplement 2 of all the goods which can be sold in Germany for the reduced rate of 7%, and on that goods, potatoes and many other items of food are listed. So, yeah. So we come to the question, who has to pay this tax? And now there is a special rule for the taxpayership in that constellation. Evidently, when I am Porter sold the potatoes to Theo, it was agreed that the potatoes stay in the warehouse. So the price was calculated and determined under the assumption that the sale was tax-free. Now, evidently, when Theo then takes out the potatoes later and causes the tax to arise, that cannot have a negative impact under the contract on the previous seller and reduce his net amount. That is why the legislator said, if a person takes out the goods from the warehouse, that person has to pay the VAT and cannot transfer the VAT burden to the previous person in the chain. That's the only just and fair thing, because under civil law, when the price was negotiated as 30,000, both assumed there is no VAT inside, contained in the price, and only Theo later caused that a VAT arises. So Theo, as the person who caused the problem, should bear the consequences of the problem. That is why Theo is the taxpayer. 13A1 number 6. So Theo, did I say Theo? No, the retailer, sorry. The retailer who bought the potatoes took them out. He caused the problem. He has to bear the VAT burden. So the person who ends the tax exemption is responsible for paying the tax. That is the only just and fair thing. This tax only has to be paid when the tax exemption is cancelled. That is, at the end of that preliminary declaration period during which the goods have been removed from the warehouse, in our case, at the end of May. Input tax claims, well, our retailer takes the goods out of the warehouse for purposes of his enterprise. He wants to sell them in his shops to private customers. So that VAT was paid for purposes of his enterprise activities, and so he has a legal right to deduct this tax as input tax, again, as if he had paid VAT included in the price for a delivery made by somebody else. Because he uses these goods for entrepreneurial activities. The only thing is, for this, he doesn't need an invoice, but another proof that he paid that VAT. So we have here another entry in the input tax claims list in paragraph 15, which says 15.1 number 5, the person who paid tax for removal of goods from a warehouse can deduct that as input tax again if and when, no, if that person uses these goods for his own entrepreneurial activities, and so on. So that was a little remark to a warehouse situation. Um, Thanks for watching, and see you soon for some other aspects of theory.